Hey there and welcome. This is Mike LaVista, and you are watching the Digital Transformist. Today on the show, we have Yosi Kossowsky, and he is a neuroscience expert who works in the executive coaching realm and has some really interesting ideas about how to use kind of what happens in our heads versus what our short-term impulses are, and how to make that work in large organizations and communicate well. Really interesting stuff. We philosophize about the impact of AI on how organizations work through the neuroscience lens. Really fun stuff. Let's get started. Hi there and welcome to the Digital Transformist. I'm Mike LaVista, and I'm really happy to say I have Yosi Kossowsky, who is an executive coach with us today. We're going to explore lots of interesting things, but I hope we can spend some time on some neuroscience and how that impacts leadership. If I had a second life, a second career, I think I would get into that. That stuff always fascinates me. I don't know if you're like a Kahn and Tversky guy, if you like or don't like that stuff. That's where my head goes to in this stuff. So I'm curious, maybe for people to get oriented. Maybe just a little bit of background, how we got to here, and let's jump into how neuroscience fits into the executive coaching.
Yeah, absolutely. Michael, so really happy to be here. Thank you. The way I got here, started off my career in technical work. So I started off in IT in the early 90s, and then early 2000s moved into an engineering role. And mid 2000s, I had an opportunity to take on some more people responsibilities, and then quickly got feedback that it wasn't my forte. And the interesting thing about going from technical to managing people is, or at least for me, was technical was very simple and straightforward. You know, you either observe other people doing it and you duplicate the work, or you read about it and then you put it into practice. And that was very natural for me. I didn't find that the idea of knowledge to application was broad at all. It was very connected. When I started working with people, that wasn't the case at all. So first of all, technically, things are very instant gratification. It either works or it doesn't work, and you know pretty quickly. With people, you never know, and even if it worked yesterday, doesn't mean it's going to work tomorrow. Secondly, learning about how to be patient, how to be a good listener, how to give people opportunities, how to encourage people to grow and develop themselves, and building employee engagement. None of those translated from a book into practice. And so when I realized that wasn't going to work, and I needed to learn from a different way how to do this, that was a very big change. And ultimately, through a funny different set of circumstances, I ended up studying emotional wellness therapy. And in that work, I learned a lot about what it is, the role of my emotions, how to name them, understand them, see where they're coming from, understand, when I don't have a better word. I know it's not a great word these days, triggered by something that's happening around me, what was the underlying, let's say, reasons for that. Started to learn about limiting beliefs and derailers. And in the middle of that, I got really interested in the hardware of the where the emotions are being housed, which is the body. And that's what kind of led to the neuroscience study. And one of the things that I found really curious, let's say, as I was doing the emotional work, was, why is it that if I make a decision to do something like, let's say, not eat chocolate, that doesn't shift my emotional experience? Meaning I still have a desire for chocolate, and walking by chocolate in the store, I still am tempted and often did buy it. And I'm like, okay, something is seriously wrong if my brain is not driving the system. So I really wanted to understand why. Why is it that the conscious process wasn't enough to shape my behavior or anybody else? And there's so many examples of it. I don't know why I was so surprised, but New Year's resolutions, for example, like we make them, and by February they're history. What is all of that? So that led me to study the role of um, how do our emotional centers work? What is the structure of the brain, and how does it all connect? Really helped me understand the different aspects of emotions and on decision making, rational thought, logic on decision making and behaviors. Um, how that plays a role in our perception, and how that plays a role in how we understand, make sense of the world, how we communicate or not really communicate well, and all of those things. So, um, in in about 2010, I finished the therapeutic certifications. In 2012, I finished my first coaching certification, and in 2014, the company I was in got acquired, and the acquisition wasn't so smooth from a people perspective, and ultimately that led me to offer coaching. And then I realized that coaching actually was a potential role and a job, and it had impact. And that ultimately led me to spending the next 5 years focusing on people, or leadership and people development, team development within the company that I was in, which was a global company. So learning about not only leadership and employee engagement and team engagement, but also the role of culture, because I spent a lot of time in places outside of the US, Mexico, Canada, England, Germany, France, Hong Kong, um, China, Malaysia, Israel, India, and started really understanding the role of culture and generation and gender on all of those things. And so um, I ended up leaving the company Cisco at the end of 2020, briefly took a role as an HR talent management leader, and then got offered a chief technology officer role, which I did. And it was an amazing opportunity. And it also really helped me recognize that that really get me up in the morning with a lot of passion was working with leaders and teams on helping them be more effective. And
That's amazing.
so I decided to make that my full-time role for the last few years.
Hmm. So it's funny, as you were talking, a couple ideas I love to have you mix together a little bit. You said some interesting things. One of them was that I related to as someone that came up in engineering and software development, was this idea that from a technology point of view, you in theory program things to do something, and they do it typically, but people do not do that. And as leaders, the larger the organization gets, the more complicated it gets. And the other thing you said was confusion about I think it's something like the mind is not driving the boat or something. And so as a
Right.
leader, so if you were to mix those together, if I'm trying to come up with a way to change the direction or change the attitudes of an organization, and have to deal with the fact that people are people, and they're going to make decisions that are unsurprising and not predictable, and yet there's some neuroscience behind how they may be reacting. How do you blend that into, if you have an executive that maybe has I don't know, an organization that's in trouble, that maybe has a root cause of some attitudes and things like that? What do you do to coach people with those kind of situations?
So in the end of the day, or in the beginning of the day, my mind is very engineering focused. And I've ended up finding a non technical way to explain the role of how our perceptions are developed and how they play out, how that plays a role in our communication,
Hmm.
the words that we type, we use, the focus we do, um, also the things about body language, etc. So I start off explaining to leaders and help them understand the system. What just because I say something doesn't mean, actually for sure means that when I'm talking, and I'm talking to you and I'm talking to your listeners, what I know for sure is that everybody is processing my words differently. What I don't know is how you're processing them, but I can guarantee it, that if I were to be able to take a snapshot of your brain and how you've interpreted anything I've said and compare it to what I was intending to say, there's differences. Not maybe huge, but there are differences. So very often in companies, we approach where I'm going to talk, I'm going to ask you guys any questions, and you're going to say no. And then I'm thinking, check, done, you understand it. But then I get a result, and the result isn't matching what I intended, what I thought we agreed on. And then that creates frustration, it creates delays, it creates, that's not a bug in the system. That's actually the design of our brain. And if we can actually understand how something works, it's kind of same as understanding. If I drive my car and I don't put fuel in it, let's say you don't have an EV, right? Or I don't battery charge it, the car is going to stop working, not because the car is broken or stupid, but because that's part of the functioning. And the more that we can understand how, how the brain processes information and how much of it is obfuscated from anybody else, then the way in which I approach my communications, the way in which I um, find ways to ensure, validate what you are getting versus, and what I'm saying, it extends the effort up front, but it reduces the error on the back end, and it makes ultimately people more effective, more efficient. It raises employee engagement and makes things work better. And so I don't know if that's a long way of answering your question, Michael, that by helping leaders understand the system, helping them actually experiment and see that play out, see what they can do about it, um, is a huge part of those first steps in coaching
Yeah.
with me.
Well, so let's test the system. So I'm going to tell you what I think I thought you said, and we'll see how
Okay.
close I get. Because you touched on something that I've come to by accident, and I'm curious how right it was, and that as a leader, I expect to be misunderstood. And that, so the idea is, to the extent I can, to simplify a message, and then don't just believe I can say it once, that I have to say it many, many times, as much as I can without seeming like a robot. But the idea that there's this through line to what we're doing with strategy, for example, and that's something we talk about enough, so that those back and forth, say something, see how they understood it, kind of go back and correct, those auto-correcting mechanisms seem like an effective way to do it. And I think it's counterintuitive, because a lot of people feel like I should be able to say something once, and weren't you listening, that kind of thing, and now we're accusatory. Did I get reasonably close to at least some of that information?
Yes. Yes. Right.
Okay.
You got reasonably close to some of it. Now, what's funny is, and we could spend honestly
Yeah.
hours, because that's what I do when I'm coaching with people.
Yeah.
Is there's all of these, um, let's say, sub cycles of things. So one of them about weren't you listening piece is also a normal cycle, because another thing that's misunderstood is our brain, as far as we understand it, as far as I understand it, let's say, is a linear processing machine. So it can actually only do one thing at a time, not two things at a time. But we make believe that we can do multiple things at a time. So I'm listening while I'm looking at my screen or something like that. And uh, as far as we understand, that's not. So if you are listening to me, and at some point while I'm still yapping, you are starting to think about what's your next question, or thinking about that. When you go onto your thinking tangent, you're actually no longer listening. And we're all like that. But that doesn't, I don't stop. First of all, I don't have an indication when you're going off. And if I'm talking to a group of people, everyone's going to go off at a different time. Um, but what's definitely going to happen is some of what I'm saying is going to be lost, because your brain can't
Hmm.
hear and process while you're thinking. And then when you come back and say, well, what about this or what about that? And I say, well, I talked about that. And now I think you're not listening, or you're being, no, again, you weren't listening, but not because there's a fault. That is the way it works. And so, yes. And then you also mentioned about having to repeat many times. And there's a number of reasons why, when we are communicating, especially not one-on-one, but to a group of people, why a single um, sending of a message is not received by everybody or by most people. And we know, again, we cope, but yeah, so all of that is there. And the
Yeah.
more that we understand that it's going to happen, we can understand why it's going to happen. Hopefully builds, I won't necessarily compassion or empathy, but it builds an understanding that if I want it to be different, I can want it to be different. Kind of like I could say that I want the sun to be a chocolate ball. That's not going to make the sun a chocolate ball. The sun is the sun, and people are people.
Yeah. I'm noticing chocolate figures prominently in your thinking, which I do
I'm a big
appreciate.
chocolate guy. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not eating it because I'm like, on this like
Right.
thing about losing some weight, but yeah.
Right. Well, so but in all seriousness, getting back to the idea of um, that the brain is not fully driving the ship here, and that you could have a and forgive, I don't know if there's like a multiple meaning here, but the sort of the gut reaction that I'm thinking about chocolate and I end up buying it. How did I buy this? How does that factor into this conversation around leadership and kind of helping an organization understand what we're talking about? Are there sort of underlying primal is the right word, but sort of underlying desires that people sort of have that are that sort of chocolate desire that you need to think about as you're trying to get a message through and understood?
I If I understand your question, I think that in the way that I think about the world, I think there is one primal, and that primal is what's in it for me.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ultimately, we are primed for self-preservation, and in our lives, if I wanted to explain it in a terminology, it would be what's in it for me, which is really a popular term in change management. And that, it's not selfishness. Meaning, I think that what we call selfishness is a level further, or levels further from that.
Mhm.
In the end of the day, though, if you are asked to do something, consciously or subconsciously, you're going to be asking yourself, how does that help me? And what's that going to cost me
Yeah.
or take from me or require of me? And again, that is natural. The more we can understand that the brain is always focusing on optionality, and either I cover both options, or the brain will always understand that there's a second option.
Yeah. Makes this so really digging into this this idea a little further. Is there something about what's in it for me that is um, necessarily short term based? So I'm trying to go to this chocolate metaphor where the chocolate now is what the body wants, but the long term weight loss is what the mind wants. And so, for example, if we're delivering a message that has a what's in it for me, but it's a year from now, that strikes me as something as a more difficult weight loss idea to sell than hey, we're changing bonuses next week, and now I see what's in it for me immediately. Is there something to that about that kind of message for
Yeah.
for teams?
Yeah. The instant gratification, and some of the research I've read likes to say that we've gotten worse in the current generation, where we really are expecting even more instant gratification than we ever were before, and that our patience levels have really declined. Um, and certainly when we are trying to do that future benefit, it's a harder sell. I don't know if you've ever read or watched that some of the YouTubes that show the kids with the marshmallow test.
Now, did I hear that was proof false? Now,
Oh, I don't know.
no. Okay,
Then
so
then
that's
then you
good.
have more updated information
I
than I
know.
do. If that
Okay, no, I know exactly what you're talking about. The delayed gratification stuff. Yeah, yeah,
right. Um, and it maybe was proof false.
yeah.
And I can say that in my experience in working with leaders and teams, um, the future gratification piece is a tougher motivator than things that are coming out more near term. And especially, it depends on what's the cost in the meantime. Meaning, if you're going to ask me to work 20-hour days for the next year, for the hope that in a year from now I'm going to get a bonus, um, that's a big way out between what it's costing me and what's potentially in it for me. Because what can we guarantee, really? about the future. Um, not much.
Yeah, yeah. People in the comments will tell us whether we were right or wrong about marshmallows, and I'll commit to do a quick. You're the expert. You look it up and let me know if that's right or
Yeah,
not.
I'll look it up. That's so
Because
interesting. Thank you.
I'm really curious about that because I think a lot of times companies are asking people for a little bit more now for a little bit more later, and it's tough, and you have to balance it because I think we all also want to have rich. We want our teams and companies to have rich personal lives and do all kinds of interesting things. And working 20 hours for a year for a question mark at the end of it is probably too much to ask. So that's certainly somewhere in the middle. An interesting place to go. I'm curious if we might kind of take a different direction and look at we talk about the impact of AI in organizations a lot here, and I'm wondering through the neuroscience lens and leadership if something about like I feel like there's a lot of fear right now for people in virtually every industry that AI is coming to take their jobs. And the message that I've given people that I believe for our company is because we're in the software and consulting business where we should be able to use it to do more. And I have a hypothesis that people aren't going to want to spend less; they're going to expect more. So you know. Your job in theory, if you're doing good work, is safe in our world because we're just going to do more cool things as opposed to AI is going to replace us. And whether that's true or not, I'm curious your take on kind of other roles, other jobs, et cetera. And, you hear apocryphal things about, white collar jobs are going away by December, which I don't believe. So what, if any, thought have you given to how AI is going to impact kind of team and employee thinking in the future?
So I'm not a fortune teller. I don't know what the AI of tomorrow is. The AI of today, um, at least all the ones I've been exposed to, and I spend stupid, silly money, meaning I'm paying for um, Copilot, Gemini, ChatGPT, and Claude, and testing all of them in the areas that I am. Um, it does not wake up and think on its own at this point in time. It responds to prompts, and that is a very big difference between humans and computers. Is I don't whatever prompts we have that we operate on um, are deeply embedded in our brains, in our DNA. By being biological beings, we've got desires and stuff that, as far as we can tell, computers don't have at this point. So if we're looking for creativity, if we are looking for who's going to run the systems, um, what are they doing? How are they doing it? What's going to be the check on it? There's still a lot of human engagement in it. The people that I know of who are developers, at this point, yes, I know people have been fired for companies saying that we're replacing you with AI. Um, Really, where I've seen AI so far take jobs is call center jobs, um, where essentially the AI can definitely be trained on. If you're calling a software company about their software, it can be very well trained on asking basic questions, looking
Yeah,
up the database of common answers. It never gets tired. It never gets cranky. It'll work 24 hours a day, 7 days a
yeah,
week. But in the idea of replacing people, I don't see that in the roles of creativity, in um, fact checking, um, things of that nature, that AI really is consistent and reliable. In any way, you can ask an AI the same question 5 times and you'll get 5 different answers. And so, if you're looking for someone to code in a way that you're also thinking about how am I going to support that code in a year from now, um, the people who, and I'm not somebody who knows coding, but the people who do know coding better than I do tell me that um, an AI will never code the same way twice. And therefore, you won't necessarily be able to easily track down where the bugs are, where the inconsistencies are. It doesn't really know how to build for security. So I think that we are in a space of an unknown, and we are not great as humans with unknown. It does bring up our fear. It does bring up um, a lack or a feeling of lack of safety. And I think that's more of what's happening rather than the AI itself being a present danger.
Yeah, and I think, and we've both said this word a couple times today, and I think the key word for all this is yet. But the AI of today does struggle with a lot of things, and we've noticed in our world that you know an AI can develop a script up to a certain limit, and then it starts to fall apart from the complexity and cohesion point of view that makes it difficult in a larger system, like you said. But actually, I just did a Substack on something you said a second ago that may connect here to something you said earlier, which is that, when we talk about automating full jobs away completely, it's really dependent on a job being so clear to do that you can write down what it is. And there aren't many jobs like that. And so when I think about, you said earlier, like there's a frustration in organizations that people are different. They do kind of unexpected things, whatever. But also, that is the special sauce that makes a company different or special or valuable. And so, probably, this is my belief, probably there is a part of, let's say, there's a part of every job that could be automated, and that percentage is from 0 to some high number, right? But then almost necessarily sort of a bionically enhanced person, metaphorically, can get more done, and maybe some of the automated stuff, but the special stuff that makes the company different or makes it special, or someone comes up with the innovation. And think of any innovation that's ever come along that was an accident or a mistake or that kind of thing, that a human said, oh, wait a second, whatever. Everyone can think of their, from Post-its to Viagra, of interesting things that have happened that way. That's where I think the special sauce is. And I think that's what I don't think will get automated away. So if you're a CEO listening, or anyone listening to this thinking about, like, we're automating a full job away, ask yourself, could you actually diagram someone's complete role from start to finish as an automatable thing? And I think the answer for most things is no. That's my diatribe on that. Thoughts of how right or wrong that feels to you?
Yeah. So I was just coaching a leader earlier today, and she was saying that she's actually struggling with one of her team members because there's a monthly report that they do that's pretty much just a duplicate, and she does that well. But anytime there is something that comes up in that month that is different than the month before, then the person is struggling how to
Hmm.
deal with it, how to classify it, whatever. And we were just talking about strategies that she can use to help that person understand where they're at, but that's a common thing where it is very rare, in many jobs, and let's say most jobs, that you literally have no diversity in your work. You have no new things or change things that are happening or unexpected things. And it has been my experience, as you say, Michael, that that's not where AI's strength is today. If you could literally map out everything, then sure, I think it maybe could, though I've never found it again to be able to do the same thing the same way twice yet. Um, Even when I ask it literally to repeat the exact same thing, do the exact same output as the time before, it won't do the same output as the time before.
Yeah.
So
It's really interesting. Well, listen, thanks for being with me today, and agreeing to take a chance on some AI stuff that we're just sort of inventing and philosophizing on here. That was fun. I hope people enjoyed that. And Yosi Kossowsky, tell us the best way to get in touch with you after, if we're interested in following up with things.
yeah. So the best way right now is LinkedIn. I'm in the process of building my website, but it's not there yet. So LinkedIn is the place to go. There's even a button on my LinkedIn page that you can book time with me. It's a no cost, exploratory conversation if you want to have it. And if you're looking to find a way to be more effective, lead more effectively, understand yourself better, let's have a conversation.
Well, that's great. Well, again, pleasure having you, and thanks for being on the podcast. Thanks for listening to the Digital Transformist. This is Mike LaVista. And if you like that content, subscribe so you can get notified of new content when it comes out.